I'll tell you a little bit more about my background while the slides are coming up. I think Gary was kind enough to invite me to lecture at the last climate change class he taught at TU. And at the time I did still have one little oil and gas client who I have now passed off to someone else. But I am essentially a 30-year oil and gas geologist. But more than that, I'm an energy explorer. And about 3 years ago, it became readily apparent that exploring for energy meant exploring beyond petroleum. And together with the moral imperatives for doing so, I completely retooled my business to focus on global clean energy projects. So I'm going to start really close to home here in Tulsa. This is my house. And you see a few little solar panels on the far rooftop there. And on the right, you see the energy monitor that I have on my phone that reads what's going on my rooftop and with my inverter. The little bubble on the upper left says my solar panels on this sunny day in September were making about 5 kilowatts of power. We were using in that little lower bubble about a third of that. And our meter was merrily spinning backwards, feeding PSO back the other 2/3, and we get that taken off our bill. So in that sense, solar net metering is here. If I overproduce by the end of the month, they don't write me a check yet, but they may yet do so. But for every watt that I overproduce, I get paid a watt off of my bill. So the technology and the hardware are here in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, for clean energy to make inroads. But what I found as I began exploring and sort of took the Oklahoma and even the U.S. blinders off is that there's a lot more to the economic imperative behind what's happening with global clean energy trends. You can put the next slide up, please. And go ahead and hit the button again. The underlying map here is from a NOAA-NASA study and shows sea level rise in the red colors versus sea level fall in the very scant blue colors over the last 5 or 10 years. So that's just to underpin the concept that we all know from things we observe every day, changes in temperature, differences in the quantity and quality of the disasters we're experiencing, as well as the slow creep of sea level, that climate change is very real indeed. And we've known for years about the equation of tearing apart a hydrocarbon molecule and loosening CO2 in the air, and just a qualitative comparison of the two data sets on the left showing the dramatic increase in the production of, in the consumption of fossil fuels, together with, on the lower diagram at the same scale over about the last 100 years, the increase in average temperature at the surface of the Earth. So those are global average temperatures. So, this is sort of accepted science by all but a few, supported by, quality peer-reviewed work of climatologists and climate scientists and paleoclimatologists. So, this is the landscape in which we're looking at the energy transition. So the next one, and I just want to remind you that as we have been making our trek over the last couple of 100 years through the fossil fuel progression, we have been essentially moving along a trajectory that looks at kind of 3 elements of how we use energy. And those are: how abundant is it, how much are our resources, how efficient is the energy that we're using, and how economic is it. And those 3 drivers have kind of pushed us up what we call the hydrocarbon chains from very, very complex molecules like wood or biomass to coal, and then to oil, and then to natural gas. And as we make that progression to lighter hydrocarbons, we also make a progression of more and more efficient energy consumption, more bang for the buck of every gram of hydrocarbons that gets burned, and then also fewer pollutants. So there's a fundamental business driver behind the way that we have graduated through the hydrocarbon chain, but we've kind of gotten stuck now. We've gone back to liquid resources because they're fungible and they're useful as fuels. So the next one. So what I kind of want to remind, and you can go ahead and punch the next one here. What I kind of want to remind everyone is, I know you're all familiar with the Strategic Development Goals of the United Nations, and these are goals that we're attempting to reach by 2030. But I just want to focus on the energy goal here, which is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And in essence, that's been the job of the energy business for the last 100 years. It's just a change now to how we better meet those sustainable, reliable, and affordable goals. And I'm going to talk to each of those things next. So let's start with resources. And Gary alluded to this a little bit and showed you some maps. I'm putting up this really, I think, very noteworthy and memorable diagram that was put together by a solar installer from some work published back in 2009 by the Energy Information Agency. And these spheres are each representative of a quantity of resources in proportion to each other. On the gray side of this diagram on your right, those are all finite resources. So there is a calculable amount of that resource present on Earth. Now we can argue about whether there's twice as much coal or half as much coal, but there is, by definition, a finite amount. The resources on the left are renewable, so by definition, rejuvenated within our historical lifetimes. So the renewable resources, the numbers there and the size of those spheres, represents annual available energy. And the little dot in the middle, which says 16 terawatts, is world consumption. Now this study was done in 2009. World consumption today is about 20 terawatts, and it's predicted to be about 23 terawatts in the coming 4 or 5 years. So that little dot then, we'd have to divide into all the finite resources on the right-hand side, and we could get a number of years we have left to use those resources to make energy. On the left-hand side, you can see easily how we could piece together any number of those renewable resources to meet that global energy demand. But the overwhelming source of energy that is, as Gary said, 10,000 times, several orders of magnitude times the quantity of resources that we need, that is regenerated each and every day, is solar energy. So all of the technology development, all of the push behind batteries and storage and solar components and efficiency is all driven on capturing as much of that as we can. Next one. So now I want to talk a little bit about efficiency. This diagram is great. It's a busy lab scientist's dream of a diagram, but what it has on the left, on the y-axis, is just efficiency of the amount of sunlight that falls on a solar collector. How much does it convert into energy? Is it 5%? Or up at the top, up to around 50%. And then you have time on the horizontal axis. So each of these lines represents a study from a number of different, various different kinds of solar technology, but I love, if you could push the next one, I love this graph from a website called explainthatstuff.com, and they have taken these same data and just put them on a really simple graph, so you can see how rapidly we have made the efficiency transition in solar technology, and it continues to evolve. But what you see here is going from around 5% 75 years ago to approaching 50% today. So this increase in efficiency is happening at a much higher rate than we moved from wood to coal to oil to natural gas. I mean, this is overnight, and we're talking about transitions that took us centuries and millennia to make in the past. So this is happening in a heartbeat. Next one. And the final element, of course, that we were going to talk about is cost, economics, what's driving us to move to clean energy resources. And this is just a graph, and it's one of thousands I could show you, of the precipitous drop in cost of solar technology over, you can barely see the line there in 2017, and I don't even have data up through 2019. But I'll just throw a couple of numbers at you. Do you know about what we pay per kilowatt hour for electricity in Oklahoma? Anybody got a guess? It's about, nationwide, we pay anywhere from 6 cents to 30 cents. Here in Oklahoma, and on average, it's 12 cents. And here in Oklahoma, we pay 8 cents. The latest utility scale solar project that I saw announced as ready to put the shovel in the dirt was 2 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? So solar costs have just dropped through the floor. Next one. Now, I am a geologist, so I like maps. And this is a map from the University of Texas Energy Institute in Austin. And there is a beautiful calculator that you can download and do these calculations yourself. But what they have done here is represent each county's lowest cost of energy, given all of the costs, including health factors and carbon and all of the benefits, including subsidies, as we subsidize our natural gas here in Oklahoma. So everything is included in this economic model of fully burdened analysis. And the colors indicate which form of energy is the cheapest across the US. Now the green is all wind. So you see that beautiful wind corridor that Gary showed in his slides. The purples and the grays are areas where solar is the cheapest. And the pinks and the oranges are areas where natural gas is the cheapest. There is no nuclear, there is no coal, there is no oil on this map. These are now the cheapest 3 ways to generate electricity. And this map was done a year ago, so it's completely obsolete. And I anticipate when they put out their next version of it, we're going to see a lot more solar and a lot less natural gas. In fact, the Rocky Mountain Institute recently put out a study that showed of the natural gas plants that are on the books to be built today, if we look at how long it will take for dropping solar and storage prices to put them out of business, they will all be stranded assets in the next 4 to 5 years. So this is happening, and this is Rocky Mountain Institute now, mind you, but they do good analytical work. So this is happening very fast, really rapidly. Next one, please. This is a story of something happening in Oklahoma. Western Farmers has just contracted with NextEra to put in a 700 megawatt wind solar storage plant to feed energy into Western Oklahoma. And if built, when built, this will be the largest such WSS wind solar storage plant in the US. So it's not just sort of pie in the sky, and what's driving this is, you remember the graph I showed you of solar costs zooming sort of to the basement. In the last 6 months, lithium-ion battery costs have dropped precipitously as well. So storage now becomes the peak shaver instead of natural gas, and we can start to talk about renewable energy as baseload energy for electricity. Next one, please. So I love this quote from actually a local Tulsa businessman, Dan Frey, who owns THG Energy Solutions. It's not how in the world are we going to find enough clean energy to help us cope with climate change. Really, instead, the world is awash with clean energy, but we have to adapt our grid, our business models to make it happen. Whoops, next one, please. So I put this slide in just because I show this a lot to students that I talk with, because as you can imagine, for those of us who spent our lives as geoscientists and engineers, and I'm sure you have many among your family and friends whose livelihoods have come from the fossil fuel industry for years and years, and there's concern over, how will this energy transition affect us? And what I just want to show is that as we look toward replacing global consumption, and you can think of this ball as representing global consumption. Along the bottom, you can punch the next one. Along the bottom, we're looking at replacing the largest chunk of energy we use across the globe is industrial use, so making and manufacturing things, building things. And if we can replace the coal and oil that's being used to manufacture things with wind and solar and cleaner natural gas, that will take care of a big part of the chunk. And these little wedges of in the upper right of residential and commercial will follow. And the next one. And on the transportation side, which is about a quarter of the energy we consume globally, and most of that is liquid petroleum, with EVs and electric trucking, we can get rid of a large chunk of that. And there have been some recent advancements y'all might have seen published in the Tulsa World about gas to liquid technology that is taking natural gas, combining it with CO2 from the atmosphere, and creating a diesel-like fuel that can be burned in airplanes and boats and trains. And now they have a sort of a component process of that that also fixes carbon into carbon nanotubes, which can be commercially used. So fascinating stuff going on with gas to liquids as well. Next one. And so if we look at all of those things happening, and we look at all the renewable resources that are coming into play, there is an enormous opportunity set there for those of us who have been in the energy business forever, where we can translate the skills we've been using in exploration and development and risk management, especially to the battery supply chain, which needs to be cleaner and greener to source all of that lithium, all of that cobalt, all of that graphite for the batteries for our EVs. Next one. So the other thing that we are working on in this sort of marriage of trying to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels is how can we make while we still are running internal combustion engines and until we all are driving EVs, how can we make the oil fields greener? Now this is a map, an infrared map that's been tuned just to natural gas flaring. And sadly, the US flares only second to, I think, Russia and Iran. We're right up there with Russia, Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela. We are among the worst in our oil fields at flaring natural gas, which is devastating as producing CO2. Next one. But there are things, and you can just flip through a couple of these. We are doing, there you go, end it there. So we are doing some things on the oil field side to try to green the oil field, not just from an environmental perspective, which is of course the most important, but these are all now cost-reducing agents for the fossil fuel industry, so they're beginning to be actually adopted. One is vapor recovery units, so that we're not flaring natural gas, and we're also seeing some really innovative technology putting field-ready CPUs and little natural gas generators to mine Bitcoin. It's highly profitable in the oil field, and it keeps the gas from flaring. And then also, of course, we're seeing solar used as an energy resource to lift fluids, which is much cheaper now than other forms of electricity. So next one. So, the good news, even in the US, is that we are seeing tremendous financial benefit from the clean energy boom. We're seeing jobs being created, electric vehicle sales are up, $8 billion in investment in renewable energy alone in the US, which just dwarfs anything that's being invested in fossil fuel supply right now. And coal, of course, just sort of dropping out of sight. Next one. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and I'm going to just give you another little global snapshot that I think is important as a lead-in to what Nancy is going to talk about. This is a Google Earth photo from Kyamunde, which is just outside of Cape Town, South Africa. And each of those little homes, up until a few months or years ago, was burning coal or even dung for heat, to boil water, for minimal electricity. And everyone who lives in those homes, and there are, thousands of informal settlements like this all over South Africa, each person that lived in one of those homes would need to walk to a business center to charge their cell phone. But what you can see, the little black dots on every rooftop, those are all solar panels. And those are being put in not by NGOs or not-for-profits. Those are being put in under business development programs from the big solar suppliers, and they're being done by small businesses that are starting up in these communities, and they're being done with financing, again, usually coordinated with the solar suppliers and with training. So this is like a market development effort for solar manufacturers. But what it illustrates is that, you remember the picture of my house, which, we've sort of squeezed these solar panels in wherever they can on the roof, and they can't quite meet all of our electricity needs. In our culture, in our country, which is so built out with an energy grid, we have to sort of force fit clean energy into our environment. Whereas in areas of the world that are unelectrified, and we have 1.2 billion people in the world who do not have adequate electricity, if any at all, this is where clean and green energy is the most efficient to install. And it has the most impact. And this is where all of the energy growth, energy demand growth is going to come in the next few years. And this is where the business model for clean energy is most applicable. So I leave you with my favorite quote from Buckminster Fuller, not to be afraid of the energy transition, but to consider it an opportunity for us to be the architects of the future and not its victims. So thank you. That's pretty much the end of what I have.